Hello there, Ben Bowers, the Spirit Specialist, and this is the video that accompanies the Some Like It Hot sample selection box that was actually put together as a tasting event that I ran last week at the time of recording in January 2025, and I still have some packs left over, so I've redone the packaging of the box so it doesn't have the Zoom link details and everything like that. I did record the stream for the people that was on the tasting, but it wasn't the best recording, and when I started editing it together to try and make it a bit more approachable for people just picking up the pack, it was just going to be a lot easier for me to almost reshoot the entire thing. So with each sample you will be getting a background information about each one, and then I'll also kind of cut in between and just give you a little bit of feedback that we got on the night, my thoughts on it, and then you can drink along as and when you want. So if you want to do it as a tasting event and do all 6 in one go, you can basically watch this video as you go through it, or if you want to dip in and dip out, I'll put the time codes in the comment in the description below, and you'll be able to jump to whichever one that you are trying. The other thing I would also say is if you are going to do it in some kind of tasting, and I normally say this on most tastings that I do, normally I forget to say it until about the third, but if you want to keep a little bit of the first and second and try the rest and maybe go back to them, because it's quite interesting sort of trying the first and second one and you're kind of, you know, getting used to doing a tasting and not quite sure what you're thinking, and then as you've got a bit more context of the other ones that you're trying, you can then go back, and more often than not you'll find that your opinions on it might change for the better or for the worst, but you might be getting extra things out of it that you weren't when you first tried it. So if you are doing all 6 in an order, remember they've got lids on, so you don't have to drink all of them in one go. But yeah, if you do want to kind of like use a few different glasses and just kind of like save a little bit of the Big Hot and the Fireball in particular, go through the rest and then actually go back to them and see if your opinions have changed. So the first one that we're going to do in the pack, because we're going to do it in the order that we did it in the tasting, let's put that up there so you can see it. Let me turn that around because I've just realised it's backwards, is the Big Hot Cinnamon Whiskey. Now, I should have technically started with Fireball, because Fireball is the reason that this whole tasting exists and that the cinnamon whiskey market is as it is. But I had the Fireball, the Dragon Reserve, which I'll get onto shortly. I had the Jim Beam and the Jack Daniels, which I thought would be quite a nice side-by-side tasting for 2 big brands doing a cinnamon version. And then the Watkins Apple is kind of completely different to everything else. I put that on more for me, to be honest. So this was kind of a bit of an outlier. And I put this on first because this is essentially the cheap and cheerful one. I shall show how good quality this is to give you an evidence of what we're looking at in terms of the standard. Is I am going to break the bottle on my head. See, plastic bottle, which is always a good sign. Essentially, knowing that I was putting this tasting together, I actually picked this up from the States. So the Big Hot, the Dragon Reserve, the Jim Beam Kentucky Fire, and the Watkins Apple Cinnamon, I have picked up from America and brought back myself when I was out there knowing that I was going to do this tasting. I wanted to try and find essentially the cheapest cinnamon whiskey I could possibly get. And it was this. So as you'll find out, it's exclusive to Total Wine. This was a whopping $11.99. So in UK money, about £9 for a 75cl, and then $19 for a 1.75 litre. They do glass bottles as well, but you've got to go with the plastic. It makes so much difference. So before I let you know what we thought of it at the tasting, here's some background information about Big Hot Cinnamon Flavoured Whiskey. Big Hot Cinnamon Flavoured Whiskey is available exclusively through Total Wine and More stores that can be found throughout America. The chain has over 250 stores across 28 states, and I always check out the selection at the location near the mall at Millennia in Orlando whenever I visit. The liquid itself is produced by the Phillips Distilling Company, who are based in Minnesota and have been operational since 1912, although liquor production only started after the end of Prohibition in 1933. Specialising in more affordable spirits, they also work in brand distribution, including the likes of Tomartin Scotch Single Malt. Part of their own portfolio includes the Revelstoke selection of Canadian flavoured whiskies, which includes a cinnamon hot bottling that is repackaged for Total Wine and More. So, it's the first one I put it on first knowing that it's probably not going to be the best one, and it's quite fun to have something a bit cheap and cheerful and everything like that. And my initial first impression as soon as I nosed it was, oh, this is like, well, I was getting thrown back to being in my grandma's house, and she used to have a toothpaste called Euthymol, which I think you can get, but it's very, very mentholy, but it's also very kind of like antiseptic menthol. Somebody else turned around and said paint thinner. We had nail varnish remover, acetate, that sort of thing. Very, very spirity, but a very acrid spiritiness as well. The cinnamon heat that came through, again, came across quite artificial, although we did start to notice that there was a syrupiness coming through, and actually the texture of it wasn't too bad. There was quite a sort of like thick, syrupy mouthfeel, which was pleasant. It was just that sort of spirity nature that was a little off-putting. The heat was there, but kind of lacking. Now, it's bottled at 30%, and there was part of me that was wanting it to actually be 40, 45. I wanted a bit more of a whiskey note coming through, and that was sort of the general consensus, was that it was a bit light, it was lacking in anything but this syrupy note. And we sort of wanted more from it. So, you know, but it's $12 a bottle, so it kind of does exactly what you'd expect it to. And as somebody said, yes, it's big and it's hot, and it's even bigger if you get the Magnum bottle. It kind of does what it says on the label, but not really a lot else. There is a spiciness to it. It's cheap and cheerful, and it sort of does exactly what it says on the tin. Okay, so now we get on to sort of the main event, and the first one being the reason that we are here. I am sat in front of this camera and you are watching this, hopefully with the sample pack next to you. So Fireball is the reason that the cinnamon whiskey, particularly in America, has taken off so much. There are bloody loads out there. Flavoured whiskey as a whole is huge, but cinnamon whiskey in particular is very, very big. So before I let you know what we thought of this, and we had sort of preconceptions about this before we'd even started, and that's partly the reason for putting this pack together, is there are a lot of people out there that will instantly dismiss Fireball. I'm a member of a bourbon group on Facebook, and their attitude towards Fireball is really, really derogatory, and to be honest, I'd never really tried it properly, whereas this gave me the option to actually look at it analytically and go, is it as bad as people make out? Those people being proper whiskey drinkers and everything like that. But before I tell you what we thought of it, here's the background information and the story behind Fireball Cinnamon Whiskey. A cinnamon flavoured schnapps was originally developed by Canadian drinks behemoth Seagram in the mid-1980s, with a background storyline that it was a product of a Canadian bartender's efforts to warm up from an Arctic blast. Seagram would eventually fold in the year 2000 after massive expansion into other industries such as film and TV, but earlier in 1989 the Sazerac Company, owners of the Buffalo Trace distillery, purchased the brand rights and formula of their schnapps range, marketing it under the title of Dr. McGillicuddy's. In 2007, the Firewater whiskey would be rebranded as Fireball Whiskey Shooter, still using Canadian whiskey as its base. Sales were modest until 2010, when Sazerac hired a national brand ambassador named Richard Pomes to spread the word about a newly branded Fireball. He travelled the country pouring shots in bars located in college towns before spreading to cities with vibrant and youthful bar cultures. Everywhere he went, Pomes shared his fireballing exploits on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram and encouraged patrons to do the same. The brand started gaining traction in 2011, reaching $2 million in sales. Then it exploded in 2013 to reach $63 million and then $130 million the following year, and it continues to grow to this day. However, it also endured a public relations mess in 2014 when Finland, Sweden and Norway recalled the product over concerns about one of its ingredients, propylene glycol, a chemical used in a variety of food products but also e-cigarettes and antifreeze. Sazerac responded that propylene glycol exists in Fireball in very small quantities, less than 1/8 of the amount allowed by the FDA, and reassured customers that Fireball is absolutely safe to drink. But as of 2018, no propylene glycol is used in production anyway. The iconic Fireball label was designed by Ross Sutherland, who also designed labels for other Sazerac brands such as Black Magic Rum and Wheatley Vodka. Despite being regarded as a major American brand, you'll notice the word whiskey on the label is spelled without an E.
This is because it continues to be made with Canadian whiskey, even though Buffalo Trace output is absolutely enormous, and Canadian whiskey doesn't use the E spelling to differentiate itself from American. Sazerac are also undergoing further court hijinks with Fireball after they released miniatures of a product simply called Fireball Cinnamon. This is a malt-based liquor bottled at 12.5% ABV, whereas Fireball Cinnamon Whiskey is a whiskey-based product, obviously, at 33% ABV. Fireball Cinnamon, however, can be sold in beer, malt beverage and wine stores and supermarkets in the US that are unable to sell spirits in store due to state regulations. However, several customers began litigious proceedings in early 2024, which is still ongoing, claiming the packaging was misleading and purchasers could easily be fooled into thinking they were buying the original whiskey-based liqueur.
Right, so in the context of having the Big Hot immediately before it, probably did Fireball a favour, because everything was ramped up to 11. There was much more complexity. The cinnamon element was there. It was less syrupy, it was less artificial, and it was actually really pleasant. But I think it was because we had the Big Hot to kind of give it that baseline to then really pick out the improvements that Fireball was giving. Somebody likened the cinnamon heat to ginger, whereas the Big Hot was quite artificial in that acetate note. That wasn't there on the Fireball, but it was like a very spicy ginger. It was very, very pleasant, and actually we could see why it was becoming so popular. The texture again was quite rich, and again we sort of wanted a bit more from it in terms of, you kind of wish the ABV was slightly higher. You kind of wish the whiskey element that was missing. The cinnamon was much more upfront. The whiskey element was kind of missing there, and it was one where, what would it be like at 40, 45 almost? Not a cask strength Fireball, although that would be interesting. But just more to it, less of the liqueur element and more of the whiskey. But I don't know if that, A, would work in terms of the flavour profile, and B, it's probably too much of a risk for the brand to really kind of push the boat out. And it would obviously put the price up as well, because you've got the duty, alcohol duty, all that lot to bear in mind. But it really was one where I was sitting there going, I think I like Fireball. But I also think that was definitely helped by having the Big Hot beforehand, rather than just diving straight into it. Now, the Dragon Reserve is essentially small batch Fireball. So Fireball, incredibly popular. Dragon Reserve was essentially why this tasting was on, and it was a bottle that I picked up from a good friend of mine who has a liquor store in Tampa. I'd actually picked it up in September 2023. And I'd sat on it until we did the tasting just gone, literally because I didn't know what to do with it. So I was out there just as she got stock. I actually was at her till having a chat with her, buying a couple of bottles, and I saw it sticking in a box out behind her. And I was like, what's that Fireball? She said, oh, it's this new Dragon Reserve one. You know, I've literally just got it. I was like, well, I've got to try this. So I picked up the bottle, brought it back with me to the UK. Didn't really know what to do with it, to be perfectly honest. I didn't want to just sell the one bottle that I'd got. I wanted to do something with it, and I wanted to try it myself. So it was a regular customer of mine who I think also wouldn't mind me calling him a friend. We got on really, really well together. He jokingly turned around and said, oh, you should do like a hot cinnamon whiskey tasting event. And I went, oh, that's a really good idea. So when I was back out in the States in September 2024, a year later, knowing that I was going to do the Dragon Reserve along with Fireball so we can do a side-by-side, it was then, right, what cinnamon whiskies are available? And in the UK, there's not many, as you'll find out. Whereas in America, there's loads. So when I was out there last time, picking up some stock for the shop shelves, I also picked up the Big Hot, the Watkins and the Jim Beam Kentucky Fire to do this tasting. So Brett, this is because of you that we are doing this. But I'm really glad we did, because it's absolutely fascinating. So, Fireball, nice bit of heat on it, really up front, and then we go for the Dragon Reserve, the charred oak, Dragon charred oak, small batch, all of this lot, premium Fireball. Really, really interesting trying that compared to the regular Fireball. But before I tell you what we thought of it, here's the background information, as brief as it is, about Fireball Dragon Reserve.
Fireball Dragon Reserve is simply Fireball Cinnamon Whiskey that's been aged in dragon-charred barrels, aka American oak barrels that formerly contain bourbon, and the aging is for several months. No more specific than that. And the level of char itself is also not divulged. It was initially released for Father's Day 2023 with a limited number of just 618 bottles. Sounds like an odd number, but Father's Day in the USA was on June the 18th, and the American calendar format has that read as 618. At the time, it had an MSRP of $19.99, but in the latter half of the year it then reappeared in stores with apparently greater availability but with a slightly higher price. Surprisingly, there was no announcement about this second release either, the bottles just began appearing. It was unclear if this was once again a limited release or if it was now becoming a permanent addition to the Fireball line. It is still available, so it seems now it's part of the core bottlings.
So on the tasting, our opinions of Fireball were actually quite positive, and I think more positive than a lot of people on the tasting were realising it was going to be. So we were, in this stage, actually quite looking forward to the Dragon Reserve, going, right, what is this going to do? Aging for several months. Let's call it between 6 to 9 months in ex-bourbon casks. What is that going to do? Is it going to improve it, or is it actually going to sand off the edges that give Fireball its character and become a little bit sort of ordinary and a bit of a letdown? And unfortunately for the room, that was the case. The flavours were there, but they weren't as upfront, and it really felt like that barrel aging has just taken a little bit of dimension off of it. It's sanded everything down. It's definitely, you know, smoother to drink, depending on your definition of smooth. It's definitely softer, but it loses its character. It doesn't have that heat. And again, we were kind of thinking, oh, I really wish it was a higher ABV. And strangely, because they're exactly the same ABV, the Fireball tastes, regular Fireball tastes like it was a higher ABV than the Dragon Reserve. Now, it's not double the price, but you know, there is this higher price point, and I'd much rather just stick to the ordinary Fireball. Now, I'm very intrigued to try and get some of the malt beverage cinnamon, the Fireball cinnamon without the whiskey, almost to do a side by side. So maybe that's something that we'll look at in the future. But yeah, the Dragon Reserve actually was a bit of a disappointment compared to standard Fireball. And we were sitting there going, I can't believe I'm saying that so far Fireball is the best one, but it absolutely is. So fascinating to try it side by side. And I do think if you were given a bottle of Dragon Reserve and you didn't have the Fireball to do that comparison, you'd probably be going, oh, this is really good. Yeah, this is, you know, there's a bit of complexity to it, it's quite soft, it's easy drinking, there's a bit of heat to it. But when you put it to the regular Fireball, it really, really suffers. And I genuinely don't think it's worth paying the extra for it. So now we move on to another side-by-side, and this is where we go into the popularity of Fireball, which has now made the cinnamon whiskey market so big, where the big brands are now getting involved because they want a piece of the action. So I really didn't know what to do between Jim Beam and Jack Daniels. Those were the two, you know, they're the two biggest bourbon stroke Tennessee whiskey brands in the world, arguably. They both have cinnamon whiskies out that came out at roughly the same time. So it made sense to kind of put these side by side. And I didn't know which one to put first. It was literally the toss of a coin. Now the Jim Beam, as you'll find out, isn't available in the UK. Jack Daniels is. And it was very, very interesting trying the two side by side. And I'd love to hear your opinions on any of these. So once you've done the tasting box, once you've gone through it, once you've watched the video, please do send me some messages, letting me know what you think. If you want to rank all 6 of them or just what your thoughts were, because it was very surprising as to sort of where what the standout were of this particular lineup. So let me give you the information about what we'll do next, which is the Jim Beam Kentucky Fire and the story with a little bit about the distillery itself.
Located 27 miles south of Louisville, Kentucky, the Jim Beam distillery dates back to 1795, although production was interrupted by Prohibition between 1920 and 1933. It's currently in the 7th generation of running by the Beam family. Jim Beam Kentucky Fire was launched in October 2014. It was only the 4th flavoured release from the brand, following Black Cherry in 2009, Honey in 2011, and the now discontinued Maple in 2013. However, there are now 7 flavoured versions of Jim Beam available, all sold at a price point which very much competes with own-label cheaper flavoured whiskies on the market. The marketing states that this liqueur uses Jim Beam bourbon as the base with an infusion of a cinnamon liqueur. Even though several flavours of Jim Beam are available to the UK market, Kentucky Fire is not officially sold here. And if you're searching for information on Jim Beam Kentucky Fire liqueur, you'll also come across plenty of news reports from July 2nd, 2019, when a warehouse containing about 45,000 barrels of Jim Beam bourbon was destroyed by a fire believed to have been caused by a lightning strike. Fortunately, no injuries were reported, but fire officials were forced to let the blaze run its course to avoid a major ethanol contamination to the nearby creek that runs into the Kentucky River.
Right, so I'm going to put it bluntly straight off the bat. This was a massive disappointment. Really sweet, really lacking in cinnamon flavour, lacking in whiskey flavour, particularly seeing as this is, you know, a high quality bourbon whiskey. I wouldn't have minded so much if the cinnamon was knocked down in order for the whiskey element to come up, but it was just really flat, featureless, especially compared to Fireball, even compared to the Dragon Reserve. The Dragon Reserve had more going to it, and even compared to the Big Hot. Big Hot had more to it, and this might be a good point if you want to, unless you want to wait to the Jack Daniels. If you've saved some Big Hot or you've still got some left, to maybe go back to that and try it at this point, either here or off the Jack Daniels. If you've got any Big Hot left, give that a go, because you'll start to see that actually Big Hot has got not a lot going for it, but there is more to it certainly than the Jim Beam. Really, really let down with this. And looking at the price points as well. So in America, Jim Beam Kentucky Fire was going for about $13.99. So it's not that much more expensive than Big Hot. And if you find it on a deal, it's actually about the same price. Jack Daniels is nearly twice the price. You're looking at 24, 26, dollars for the bottle. And just that really surprised me when I checked out those prices, because in my preconceptions of the brands and everything like that, probably would have put the pricing the other way around. And it really does look like Jim Beam are going for proper entry level, flavoured artificially, get the people that are going to not spend a lot on money and they just go, oh, it's got a flavour on it, I can neck it. I've had the Black Cherry as well, and the Black Cherry I think is better, but it's still not fantastic, and it does taste very artificial. It's just, it's a pleasantly sweet artificial cherry taste. But the Fire was a real disappointment for the entire room. It's too sweet, it's not cinnamon enough, it's not whiskey-ish enough, there's not enough bourbon element to it. It was, considering it's such a big brand and so popular around the world, it was a big, big letdown, and it really did feel like Jim Beam were just knocking something out there to take advantage of the cinnamon market without really thinking about what they're doing, and just trying to get something out there as low a price point as possible just to get the sales for it. So let's compare that with the Jack Daniels, because obviously after the Jim Beam being a bit of a disappointment, to put it mildly, was Jack Daniels going to be the same? Was it another big brand that actually is not really going to take much care about what they're putting out there, again, to take advantage of the market? But first, let me give you a little bit of background information about the Jack Daniels distillery, a brief little bit about the history that had been hidden from consumers, and then also the flavoured range, because we know that Jim Beam have quite a lot of flavours. You'd think that JD would have quite a lot of flavours as well, but as I discovered, not actually the case.
The Jack Daniels distillery is located 80 miles south of Nashville, Tennessee. Jasper Newton Jack Daniel was born in 1846 and began to work as a whiskey salesman for the Reverend Dan Cole, a local preacher who also operated a distillery as a side hustle. Until as recently as 2016, brand owners Brown-Forman would tell visitors that Reverend Call taught Jack how to make whiskey, including the iconic Lincoln County filtration process. But the truth was in fact that a slave of the Reverend, Nathan Uncle Nearest Green, was the actual whiskey maker and had brought this filtration technique across from his homeland of Africa, where it was used to filter water. When Jack Daniels eventually took over the distilling operation from the Reverend Call in 1875, Nathan Green was the very first master distiller of the JD legacy, something which was hidden until only very recently. JD Tennessee Fire was a limited release initially in April 2014, before a nationwide launch in the US in March 2015, only the second flavoured release of JD after Honey in spring 2011. Jack Daniel's Apple was launched in October 2019, and somewhat surprisingly, there are still only 3 flavours in the Jack Daniel's portfolio, and at a price point that's almost double that of what would be a competitor Jim Beam. Jack Daniel's Tennessee Fire is a marriage of the core Jack Daniel's No. 7 whiskey and apparently their very own cinnamon liqueur, not just a cinnamon liqueur. So, this went down a lot better. If you tried it by now, particularly if you tried it side by side with Jim Beam, it's not quite night and day, but there is a vast improvement. And considering the JD is, in America at least in terms of dollars, about twice the price of the Jim Beam, it's worth paying that, definitely. It's not worth making the jump up to the Dragon Reserve, it's definitely worth making the jump up to from Jim Beam to Jack Daniel's. There was a nice whiskey element coming through. The cinnamon heat that was there was really well balanced, but you got more of a whiskey feel. This was probably the closest so far out of the 5 that had more of the whiskey note coming through that we were all wanting to do. But again, nearly all of us said, I wish it was a higher ABV. I wish it was 40, 45. This was one where it was like, I'd love to see a cask strength version of this, or even a bottled in bond at 50. I wanted more of that whiskey element to come through because the balance was a lot better. Is it better than Fireball? No, it's different too. Fireball has much more heat, and if you want the heat, which is sort of what they're advertising, then it's got more of that. But the Jack Daniel's has more of the whiskey element with the cinnamon supporting it. And at that point of the night, I was saying to everybody on the tasting, I can't believe I am doing a whiskey tasting and I am saying, of the night so far, the best is Fireball and Jack Daniel's. Never thought I'd say that ever, but that's where we were. The Jim Beam was a massive disappointment, and I thought genuinely that that had the chance to be the best of the lot. And the JD was really well balanced. It is available in the UK, whereas the Jim Beam Fire isn't, and I think we've lucked out on that. Price point wise, it's about £20 in supermarkets, because you can get it in all the supermarkets. It's not one that I sell. You know, this is a tasting that I did where I couldn't offer anything for sale afterwards because 4 of them I bought back from the States and the other 2 are just available everywhere. But yeah, Jack Daniel's is Tesco, Sainsbury, Asda. It's about £20, but it does go on deal to about 14, 15 on like club card deals and nectar points and all of this lot. And I think, to be honest, for the price, I think it's actually really good in the UK. You know, it was very, very impressive. A really nice surprise. Went down really well with the audience, and I think it was probably the closest that we were all kind of wanting in terms of that balance of whiskey and cinnamon heat, not working together rather than fighting each other or one overpowering the other. Fireball was more of the cinnamon heat, masking the whiskey element a little bit, probably because it's a Canadian corn whiskey that's mass produced, and they're not really, they might not be wanting. Plus, it's called Fireball. You want to accentuate that that cinnamon heat. JD want you to taste the JD as well, so the balance is a lot better. I'm really, really impressed with it. Really impressed. And so finally, we go on to the Watkins Apple Cinnamon Bourbon Whiskey. And this was more of an outlier. This was more because I was trying to find another cinnamon whiskey, so we had a box of 6. But I didn't want to do another cinnamon whiskey, if that makes sense. I did have a look out for a kind of like a proper chili hot one. Again, really struggled from where I was looking, ABC, Total Wine, all around the Orlando area. I was struggling with a
proper chili hot one. That was really what I was looking for. Now I love apple pie, apple cinnamon, anything that's like apple and spiced and things like that, I absolutely adore. I'd seen the Watkins before and really wanted to buy a bottle just for myself. And I just thought, do you know what? It's got the word cinnamon in it. We're doing a cinnamon whiskey tasting. Sod it. Let's put it on just so that I can try it, even though it doesn't really fit with the rest. There was a part of me that was always thinking, look, if these other 5 aren't that great, nobody really likes them, hopefully the apple cinnamon one will go down well because it's sweeter and it's got an apple element and it's sweet cinnamon and all this lot. So I was really looking forward to trying this and really had my hopes up because I love that flavour profile. But before I tell you what they taste like, let me give you the background information about the Watkins company and where the bourbon whiskey and the other one that they do stands within their portfolio.
J.R. Watkins as a business dates back to 1868, originally producing and selling liniments and medical products from a base in Minnesota. The company then began selling herbs and spices at the turn of the 1900s and still have a wide-ranging portfolio of home products. They were also at the forefront of home selling, providing revenue streams for housewives and small entrepreneurs similar to Avon and lifestyle brands that operate today. In 2022, Watkins launched a range of bitters before launching the apple, cinnamon and spiced orange bourbon whiskies in June 2023. As it's stated on the label as a Kentucky bourbon, we can confidently state this is not produced at the MGP distillery in Indiana, which is a common source for many branded American whiskies. However, I've still not been able to find out exactly what distillery this whiskey is produced from.
So, Kentucky bourbon, bit of a mystery, and on the nose, straight away, the apple was really up front, and I really had my hopes up. I was like, oh yes, this is ticking all boxes for me. Unfortunately, on the palate, it just died off a little bit, and what we found, a couple of people noticed, was that although the apple note on the nose was up front, it was less so. Now, it says it's natural flavours, but it did come across slightly artificial apple-wise. I think the spices are Watkins' own, but I think the apple flavouring, I don't quite know how they've done it, but I think there is an artificial element. It died off quite quickly. So if you poured it in a glass, took a nose, apple was up front. If you left it for about 30 seconds to a minute, took a nose again, that apple kind of disappeared. The cinnamon element was sweet. On the palate, it was quite syrupy, quite sweet, but pleasant to drink. And again, as you poured it and took a sip, it was up front, but it all died off quite quickly. There was a little note of artificiality, which just knocked everything down a bit. Again, we kind of wished it was 40%. We wanted a bit more alcohol kick to really lift the flavours. The ABV is just too low. It's too diluted, and it's pulling everything out and just making everything a little bit flabby. Really would love to see it like 40, 45%. It was one where it was good enough, but it wasn't as good as I wanted it to be. And I really, really wanted it to be good. I'm not so keen on the sounds of the spiced orange, because I think that could be even more disappointing, because if the orange is slightly artificial and it starts to taste like, you know, like orange concentrate, that's going to taste a bit weird.
That's all, folks.
That was the tasting, and it was really good fun. Absolutely loved it. I'm so glad I put it together. I'm so appreciative of the people that joined us on the night. It was really good fun getting the comments off people, the various reactions. It was fascinating to try the Fireball to the Dragon Reserve and the reactions to that, and most people going, nearly everyone in fact, going, actually, I think I prefer the ordinary Fireball. The Jim Beam and the Jack Daniels, again, was fascinating, with this going, the Jim Beam being a real disappointment, and the Jack Daniel, actually, I think it probably did both of them a favour. I think if I'd have put the Jack Daniels on first and then the Jim Beam, the Jack Daniels wouldn't have come across quite as well as it had done, and the Jim Beam would have come across even more disappointing. So we kind of lucked out in terms of the order of that. The Watkins, would I buy it again? If it's on deal, when I'm out in the States next, I probably would buy myself a bottle, and I'd get through it and I'd enjoy it. It's lacking a little bit, but it's close to where I need it. Now, cinnamon whiskey, massively popular. Peanut butter whiskey, maybe even more popular at the moment in the market. But if you go out to the States, or if you're watching from the States, you'll know flavoured whiskies in America is absolutely huge. Now, not all of them are Canadian whiskey based, but that does seem to be kind of a lot of places are using Canadian whiskey as the base to make flavourings. Ensign, which is a Canadian whiskey brand, have some of the most bonkers flavours I've ever seen. Birthday cake flavoured whiskey, which I have tried and was bizarre, but to be fair, did taste a bit like birthday cake. We're actually out, so I'm filming this in January of 2025. We're actually going out to the States again in July of 2025 for my wife's 45th birthday. But while we're out there, I'm also going to be picking up a load more bottles for the shop. But I'm very, very tempted to do a flavoured whiskey tasting. I previously bought a bottle of Rattlesnake Rosie's Maple Bacon Whiskey. Really, really interesting whiskey because it's not flavoured. They've got this flavour profile based on yeasts. I think it's absolutely amazing, and I'd love to see people's reactions to it. So I'm very tempted to, when I'm out there, pick up 6 bottles of essentially the most bonkers flavoured whiskey tasting you will ever know. There's things like peach, probably that birthday cake. So birthday cake I think would be on there because it's just mad. The maple bacon is fascinating, and I'm going to see if I can get some other stuff. There are peanut butter whiskies, but there's peanut butter and jelly, peanut butter and chocolate pretzel, things like that. So probably a peanut butter and flavour, and I'll see what else I can get out there. So if anybody has any ideas in terms of what flavours I could get, let me know before July, before I get out there. And then in August, September time, keep an eye out for a tasting event that will be the weirdest flavoured whiskies you've ever come across. Maybe I'll call it the United Tastes of American Whiskey or something. I don't know. I need a catchier name than that. But thank you very much for taking part of this, for buying the sample pack. If you're watching this, there may still be packs available. Whatever's left once it's sold, that's it. So, you know, grab it while you can. Thank you for your time. Do let me know your thoughts on this 6. I'd really like to get some more feedback on it. Keep an eye out for the tasting events. Time of recording, I've got a couple of tasting events on the go. We've got a 4 Roses one with chocolate pairing, but I'm also planning some other, not just whiskey tastings, also looking at potentially like a drinks quiz that you can do at home that would be kind of a bit like this, but it'll have quiz questions and all sorts of things like this. So if you're not on the mailing list and you want to keep updated, head onto the website, go down to the bottom. I think it says keep me in the know or something like that. Click on that, put your email address in, that'll get you onto the mailing list. Facebook, Instagram now and again, but mainly Facebook and Blue Sky because X is an absolute dumpster fire. And keep in touch. I am always here. You can also buy, if you're in the UK, I do nationwide UK delivery. So it's www.spiritspecialist.com. Keep an eye out on that. I've got a sale on at the moment, and there's always deals, and I'm always picking up unusual stuff because that's what I'm about. So thank you for your time, and I shall see you very soon. Cheers.